welcome back to the deep dive. Usually I come into these recordings pretty pumped up. We've found some cool new tech or a history mystery or a productivity hack.
Yeah.
But I have to be honest with you, and with everyone listening, today is different. I've got this stack of notes in front of me based on a text called The Ethics of Coerced Labor and Bodily Commodity. And reading it, it didn't just keep me up last night. It made me feel physically uncomfortable.
Like, it's heavy. There's no way around it.
It's heavy, but it's like looking at an optical illusion you've seen your whole life, and suddenly the image shifts, and you realize you've been looking at it wrong the entire time.
That's a perfect way to put it.
It just challenges the fundamental way we define right and wrong when it comes to work.
It is. This isn't just about, labor laws or economics. It's about the stories we tell ourselves to sleep at night.
Exactly.
It challenges these deeply held societal norms about what is dignified and what is degrading. And honestly, the moment you hear the premise, your brain just wants to put up a defensive wall.
Mine certainly did. So let's not dance around it. Let's start with the central provocative question that anchors this entire discussion. The research poses this.
Right.
Is there a moral difference between a person selling their body for sex and a coal miner selling their body for fuel?
And that is the question that stops you in your track.
It stops you because the immediate knee-jerk reaction for me, and I assume for 99% of people listening, is, yes, of course there's a difference.
Right. All of it.
One is prostitution. It's taboo. It's often illegal. We view it as exploitative by definition. The other is industry. It's the backbone of the economy. It's hard, honest work.
Yeah.
The guy with the soot on his face is a hero in American culture.
Exactly. We have statues of one and we arrest the other.
Right. But the material we're looking at today demands that we don't just accept that gut feeling. It demands we look closer at the mechanics of what is actually happening to the human being involved.
And I want to set the stage here very clearly before we go further. This isn't a debate about the morality of sex work in a vacuum, and it's certainly not an attack on the mining industry or the people who work in it.
No, not at all.
This deep dive is an analysis of exploitation. The core tension here is an act immoral because of what the specific work is, the mechanics of the sex or the digging, or is it immoral because of the lack of real choice behind it?
That distinction is the whole ballgame.
It is.
What you do versus why you have to do it.
Precisely. If we peel back the layers of social stigma and tradition, are we looking at two completely different things, or are we looking at two versions of the exact same desperation?
So today, we're going to unpack these massive concepts.
Yeah.
Economic coercion, the idea of the body as a commodity, which sounds academic but gets terrifyingly real. And finally, where society draws the line between honest work and victimization.
It's going to be a bumpy ride.
Okay, let's unpack this. The first concept the text tackles is what it calls the illusion of choice. Or, to put it more bluntly, the work or starve dynamic.
Right.
The text draws this direct parallel. On one side, you have a sex worker. We often picture this person acting out of desperation. Maybe a single parent, maybe someone with zero other options to keep a roof over their head.
A situation most people would immediately identify as tragic. We look at that and say, that person is being exploited by their circumstances.
Right. We feel pity. But then, on the other side, the text puts a coal miner. Now, let's really picture this. This is also someone working to feed a family, but they are working in an environment where the air is thick with dust, facing the very real statistical certainty of black lung, chronic pain, and a significantly shortened lifespan.
And this is where the comparison starts to get uncomfortable, because the argument here is that if you strip away the job title, the driving force is identical.
Right.
It analyzes the concept of a non-choice.
A non-choice. I really struggled with this at first, because nobody is holding a gun to the miner's head, right? Right. They signed up for the shift.
Well, let's look at that gun. The argument is that in both scenarios, if the motivation is work or starve, then consent becomes a very, very tricky word.
Sure.
If the alternative to the work is your children going hungry or losing your home, is saying yes to the job actually a choice?
The text puts it pretty brutally. It says the ultimatum is essentially, do this or your kids don't eat.
Right.
Or accept the risk of this disease, or there is no alternative. When you frame it like that, is that actually freedom?
It's the illusion of freedom, and here is the reality check the research provides. No one wakes up as a child dreaming of getting black lung disease.
Of course not.
Just like no one wakes up dreaming of sexual degradation. These aren't aspirations, they are calculations of survival.
That's a powerful point. We often romanticize the hard worker in the mines. We talk about the grit, but are we ignoring the fact that nobody wants to destroy their lungs?
No.
They do it because the system they live in, maybe a town where the mine is the only employer, leaves them no exit ramp.
Correct. So if we look at the first major takeaway, it's this. In terms of consent, purely looking at the agency of the worker, both situations represent economic coercion. The difference lies in presentation, not essence. Both the miner and the sex worker are being pushed into harm by systems that benefit from the desperation.
Presentation, not essence.
It's why.
That really sticks with me. It suggests that we are looking at the same picture, just in different frames.
Exactly.
One frame is gilded and says industry. The other is dirty and says vice.
Exactly.
But that leads us directly to the next big question, doesn't it? If the essence is the same, if both are coerced and both are harmful, why is one socially accepted, even celebrated, while the other is stigmatized and shamed?
This brings us to a concept the source calls moral aesthetics.
Moral aesthetics. It sounds like we're judging a painting, not a labor market.
In a way, we are. We're judging how the labor looks and feels to us as observers.
Okay.
We aren't judging the harm to the worker. We're judging how the work makes society feel. Think about the narrative we build around coal mining.
Well, historically, like I said, it's the backbone. It's tough. It's patriotic almost, keeping the lights on.
Right, but physically. The text describes it as something that destroys bodies slowly. It kills quietly, statistically.
Yeah.
You don't see the damage happening in real time. A miner doesn't walk out of a shift bleeding necessarily. The damage accumulates over years in the lungs and joints.
Okay.
But crucially, it produces useful output. It creates energy. It creates profit.
Right.
It fits the narrative of honest work because it powers the rest of society.
Okay, I see where this is going. So contrast that with a description of sex work.
Well, sex work violates sexual autonomy, which is a very specific kind of violation. It is immediate, intimate, visible.
Right.
It triggers a sort of primal alarm in our brains.
And it produces pleasure, not coal. It doesn't run a factory.
And that is key. Society moralizes pleasure heavily. Sex work threatens traditional norms regarding sex, the family unit, and who controls bodies.
But the synthesis here.
The synthesis here is that we sanctify the miner and stigmatize the sex worker, not based on the harm done to the individual.
Because, as the text argues, a slow death by black lung is objectively horrific.
Right. We make the distinction based on moral aesthetics. We are more offended by the violation of sexual norms than we are by the destruction of a worker's health for energy.
That is, well, it forces you to check your own biases. We are effectively saying it's noble to destroy your body for a light bulb, but it's shameful to destroy it for someone else's pleasure.
That is the harsh logic exposed here. We need the miner to be a hero so we don't feel guilty about using the electricity he dug up.
Right.
If we viewed him as a victim of coercion, we'd have to question the whole system. So we give him a badge of honor instead of safety.
Wow. We give him a badge of honor instead of safety. That gets deep.
Yeah.
But here's where it gets really interesting for me. The text moves on to define what is actually being sold. This section is titled Defining the Commodity. And it asks us to get really clinical about the transaction.
This is where we have to strip away the sentimentality. If we do a cold, hard inventory of the body, what is the miner selling?
Okay, looking at the breakdown, the miner is selling lungs, cartilage, joints, years of life expectancy.
It's a physical depletion. And the sex worker?
They are selling sexual access, emotional boundaries, bodily autonomy.
Now here comes the punch of the argument. The text argues both are selling their bodies.
Right.
They're just selling different parts at different speeds.
Different parts at different speeds. That really flattens the distinction, doesn't it? It makes it sound so biological.
It does. It strips away the social narrative and leaves just the reality of the flesh. You are trading pieces of your physical self, whether it's the lining of your lungs or the sanctity of your intimate space for survival.
The text also makes a claim about societal entitlement here. It says that labeling one trade as dignified and the other as degrading reveals whose bodies society feels entitled to use.
That's a heavy accusation. It suggests that we feel entitled to the miner's lungs, that it's a fair price for keeping the lights on.
We accept the wear and tear.
We accept that wear and tear as the cost of doing business, but we feel protective or perhaps possessive over sexual access. It questions whether our outrage regarding sex work is about protecting the worker or about controlling who gets to use that specific commodity.
It's uncomfortable to think that we might view the wearing out of a human being in a mine as fair use, like they are a piece of machinery.
But that is what the honest work label implies. It implies that this sacrifice is acceptable. He's making an honest living.
Yeah.
Well, that living is killing him. Why is that honest?
Okay, let's shift gears a little bit. We've talked about the choice being an illusion, but the research goes even further. It brings up the concept of trafficking. Now, usually when we hear trafficking, we think of the movie Taken. We think of chains, kidnapping, shipping containers, passports being stolen.
Right. That is the legal definition, or at least the Hollywood definition. Force, fraud, coercion in a very physical, immediate sense.
Yeah.
But the text distinguishes between the legal definition and the moral reality.
It talks about invisible chains.
Yes. Think about the scenario we discussed earlier. Imagine you are born into extreme poverty in a remote region. Education is unavailable to you. There are no other jobs.
Right.
And refusal to work in the one available industry, let's say it's dangerous agricultural work or mining, means hunger or death for your family. Is that freedom?
No. That's survival. That's hostage logic.
Exactly. And the argument here is that in these cases, the system is doing the trafficking, just without chains.
That is a radical reframing. The system is doing the trafficking.
It suggests that poverty and lack of opportunity function exactly like a trafficker. They force you into labor you wouldn't choose under conditions you can't control for the benefit of others.
So,
If a trafficker holds a gun to your head, you work. If the economy holds starvation to your head, you work. The result, coerced labor, is the same.
So following that logic, the text claims that many forms of what we call respectable labor are essentially, what was the phrase, slow, socially acceptable trafficking.
Slow, socially acceptable trafficking wrapped in contracts instead of violence.
Man, that changes how you look at a lot of low-wage, high-risk jobs. It suggests the employment contract is just a piece of paper masking the coercion.
It demands we stop looking at the paperwork and start looking at the power dynamics. If you can't say no because the alternative is catastrophe, the yes on the contract is meaningless.
But wait, I have to play devil's advocate here. If we say everything is trafficking, doesn't that dilute the meaning of the word? Like, surely there's a difference between a guy in a mine and someone literally locked in a basement.
Of course. And the text doesn't say they are identical in severity, but that they are on the same spectrum of coercion.
Okay.
It argues that drawing the line at sex versus non-sex is the lazy answer.
So how do we redraw the line? If the old metrics are broken, how should we actually measure exploitation?
The research proposes a new set of metrics. Instead of looking at what the work is, we should look at the conditions surrounding it. It lists 4 criteria. First, the degree of coercion. Second, the ability to refuse without catastrophic consequences.
That seems like the big one. Can I walk away and still eat?
Exactly. That is the exit test. Third is control over conditions. And fourth, and this is crucial, who captures the profit versus who absorbs the damage.
Okay, so let's apply this. The text gives us some comparative scenarios to test this new metric, effectively scenario A versus scenario B.
Right. Let's look at scenario A. A well-paid, voluntary sex worker with autonomy. This is someone who can choose their clients, set their hours, keeps the majority of their earnings, and can leave the industry tomorrow if they want to.
Okay. Versus scenario B. A desperate miner with no safety, no exit, and no voice. Someone trapped in a company town, perhaps, or just trapped by the lack of other skills and opportunities, destroying their health for a wage that barely covers rent.
If we use the source's logic, this new metric of coercion and control, what's the verdict?
This is the part that flips the script. By this logic, the miner in scenario B is more exploited than the sex worker in scenario A.
Correct. Even though the miner is doing honest work and the sex worker is doing something taboo,
Right.
because the miner has less agency, less safety, and is absorbing more damage for less control.
That is hard for people to accept.
Yeah.
We want to believe the sex worker is always the victim and the miner is always the free man.
But the text adds that if you compare a trafficked prostitute and a debt-trapped laborer, someone working in a sweatshop or a dangerous field because of debt, they are morally comparable victims.
That really flattens the hierarchy of victimhood we tend to have in our heads.
Yeah.
It says exploitation is exploitation, whether it happens in a bed or a mine shaft.
And it forces us to realize that we often ignore exploitation if it's happening in a factory or a mine because the product is something we want to buy without feeling guilty.
Right.
We don't want to think of our jeans or our phone batteries as products of coercion.
And which leads us to the conclusion of the text. And I have to say, it's not a happy ending. It doesn't wrap this up in a nice bow.
No.
It basically accuses the reader of being part of the problem.
It does. It points the finger at a different culprit entirely.
The argument is that the real enemy isn't prostitution. It claims that prostitution isn't uniquely immoral. The immoral thing is desperation.
That's the core thesis. The existence of a world where people have to sell their bodies in any capacity, whether for sex or for silicon, just to survive, is the moral failure.
And the text calls out what it terms the utility trap.
The utility trap is the idea that society tolerates forms of desperation that keep the lights on, the shelves stocked, and the profits flowing.
Yeah.
We are willing to look the other way on the miner's black lung or the factory worker's repetitive strain injury or the exposure to chemicals because we need the output.
It's a transaction we've collectively agreed to, but the people paying the price didn't really get a vote.
Exactly. We accept their destruction because it is convenient for us.
The author holds up a mirror to us and says, we currently draw the line at what benefits us, not what harms people.
And that is a damning indictment. If the exploitation makes my life easier, provides me with cheap energy, cheap clothes, cheap food, I classify it as honest work and don't think about the body being sold to produce it.
Yeah.
But if the exploitation offends my sensibilities without providing me a tangible utility I admit to needing, like sex work, then I condemn it.
It suggests our morality is largely based on convenience and aesthetics rather than actual empathy for the human being involved.
It suggests we are hypocrites. We are comfortable with human sacrifice as long as it happens slowly and results in a product we can hold.
So what does this all mean for us? We've gone from a shocking comparison, sex work versus mining, to a really logical step-by-step critique of how we value labor.
We have, and I think the power of this material is that once you see it, you can't unsee it.
No.
The comparison stops being a shock tactic and starts being, as the text says, disturbingly logical.
It removes the stigma and just leaves the mechanics of survival. It makes you realize that freedom in the labor market is a luxury that a lot of people don't actually have.
And it challenges us to stop asking, is this job respectable? And start asking, is this person free?
That's the shift. From respectability to freedom.
Because if we accept this premise, we have to admit that a lot of the global economy is built on people who are not free, selling parts of themselves because they have no other choice.
And that is a lot harder to stomach than just saying prostitution is bad, mining is good.
Yeah.
It implicates everything.
Much harder, but much more honest.
Before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final thought, something that has been rattling around in my head since reading this. We've been talking about mines and sex work, which might feel distant to some of you, but look around the room you're in right now.
Look at the products, the technology, the energy powering your headphones right now.
How many of those things are the result of someone else's slow destruction? How many people sold their lungs, their joints, their years of life because they had no choice, just so we could have this convenience? And why have we decided that their destruction is normal? Just because it happened slowly and resulted in a product we like?
It's a question that redefines the true cost of living. It makes you wonder what we're actually paying for.
It sure does. This was a lot. But I think it's a conversation we needed to have. Thank you for taking this deep dive with us. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary.
Thanks for listening. Keep thinking, and don't be afraid to question the narratives you've been told.
See you next time.